All right, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining again this week. We're going to talk about understanding your buyer persona. So last week we talked a lot about the ideal customer profile, why you need one, how to use it. This week I wanted to kind of take that a step further and really just talk about the actual buyers within those customer profiles. So when we're dealing with businesses, we have to remember that we're dealing with people. And so ultimately, what we want to do is really kind of focus on who the buyer is going to be within each of our customer profiles. So today, what we're going to do is kind of talk about how to uncover that and then how to use that buyer persona to really kind of get better at selling. So, first off, developing buyer personas, just wanted to kind of talk through, why we need so many details in terms of who the buyers are. First off, we want to understand their specific needs and challenges, but as it relates to them as individuals, not just as a business as a whole. And so sometimes I think when we go to sell business to business, landscape maintenance to commercial customers or snow plowing, for example, the people that we're actually selling to are not always the decision makers. And we have to really understand exactly how to sell each persona in that sort of customer profile so that we get the best results. And so connecting with these people really relies on us asking really good questions. And I think the questions need to be developed based on the actual person that we're selling to at each stage of the sales process. So one thing that I want to kind of talk about off the start is how to build these buyer personas. I think a lot of times people, instinctively know this, and I think definitely in scaling businesses, this becomes a big problem. Often the owner has kind of learned how to sell to different buyer personas naturally just through trial and error. And let's face it, some of us are just better at selling than others. But when we go to get other people in our companies to go out and start selling to customers that we're kind of used to selling to, they don't always have the same success. And I think often it's just because there's some missing training and some awareness. And so documenting these buyer personas is a great place to start. So some of this research and data collection can just come from people in your own company who really understand your buyer personas as they are today. And then other times, maybe we're starting to sell to different types of customers, different services, different end markets, and we have to do a little bit of external research. But in any case, I think really getting started with buyer personas depends on understanding who the customers are. In some cases, doing some actual interviews. Again, if it's something that we're not used to selling, we might want to actually go out and just talk to people who are typically buying these things and find out what the main criteria looks like. Surveys, sales data, industry reports, associations are fantastic, obviously. Getting involved with, for example, a property management association and understanding all of their industry reports and really getting involved in getting behind the scenes and understanding what a property manager's main considerations are, or even what their pain points are day to day in their job. Once we've kind of got the research out of the way and we know exactly what we're looking at, I think it becomes important for us to start to really think through, key things that are going to help us identify who we're dealing with within each ideal customer profile. So here, this could be things like, the basic demographics, things like job titles. If we're selling commercial, we want to know who are we looking for when we're out doing research before we even call on a prospect company. What kind of job titles are we looking for? So if we're looking through LinkedIn or if we're using some sort of a paid list database to access these people, we want to make sure that we can identify the right role or the person who's likely to be responsible for the contract that we're out trying to sell. So we want to figure out what the titles are. We want to figure out, what the titles look like for different types of customers. And again, that's where the customer profile is so important. The job title changes a little bit based on the type of business. So whether it was an office park or a hospital, or maybe it's an entire school district, or maybe it's a factory or a warehouse, generally the buyer or the person that would be responsible for, let's say, a snow contract will have a slightly different title based on the type of business that they're in. And so it gets pretty important for us to kind of come up with a list of potential job titles within each of our ideal customer profiles. Then we can kind of target better people, have better conversations, and ultimately create a much, much better sales process that kind of speaks to that person, which is more likely to either allow us to close or at least close that phase and move to the next phase of the sales process. So we want to understand the demographics. The responsibilities for each of these buyers is really important. And I think the more that you understand and all of your salespeople in your company understand exactly what they manage day to day and what their goals look like or what success looks like for that specific role, I think is really important, because it allows us to build rapport. It allows us to position ourselves as an expert a little bit faster, but also just kind of prevents us from maybe saying the wrong thing. Because one thing I usually say is, when we go to start selling somebody something, I always try to envision it being like we've got a full tank of gas when we start the conversation. And the more good questions we ask, the more likely we are to not burn any. But when we start asking questions that don't really hit the mark, or when we make statements that don't hit the mark, we're kind of draining the tank. And so I usually kind of say like 2 to 5 questions will either make the deal or break the deal. And ideally, we know what the right 5 questions are for the actual customer profile, but most importantly, for the actual person that we're speaking to. And so understanding their goals is a pretty important component. We want to know what the goals of this buyer are ideally or normally going to look like, so that we can really kind of get inside of their heads and know what questions to ask long before we ever get there. And so the pain points are definitely that next component. When we figure out who they are and what they do and what their goals are, it becomes much easier to kind of really focus on what their common issues are in business and what their day-to-day needs are. What is their pain point? What's holding them back from reaching those goals? How can we be the service provider that's going to really make those pain points either completely go away or take them down to the absolute minimal level? And so I think when we really, really, truly understand the pain points, we can do many things. And ideally, we can connect our service offering and our sales process together, make sure that we've got the perfect service offering, make sure that we've got people who know how to explain it to those that really have that problem. And so ultimately, I think these pain points and challenges set us up for success in many ways, allows us to craft the perfect service offering and the perfect sales pitch all in one. And I really do believe that connecting our operations strategy with our sales strategy is where success really lies. And when we've created a service offering that's super compelling and solves all of these problems, the only thing left is really to make sure that we train our team to explain those value propositions in a way where all of the pain points with these known buyers can kind of get put to rest as early as possible in the conversation, so that we position ourselves as that advisor, that trusted resource that they really want to work with. And I think oftentimes that really relies on us knowing this in advance, and that's why this is so important, clearly. This behavioral piece, we want to get really clear on what we're really trying to uncover in terms of the decision-making process, because we need to know if the person that we're selling is actually able to make the contract decision and sign off and approve everything, or if they're kind of a cog in the wheel, which in bigger commercial contracts, let's face it, very rarely are we sitting there with the final decision maker. Normally we're there with a key person, a person with a lot of influence in the decision process. And so we need to connect well with them, but we also need to kind of understand where they sort of sit in the overall process so that we can help them believe that we're the right decision and that we're going to help them look good or, achieve the goals that they've ultimately got in front of them as a business person. So as quickly as possible, we want to be able to understand the decision-making process. And I think that really does come from these power questions or compelling questions that we are able to generate once we know exactly who these buyer personas are. So again, the last step, I think, is just kind of thinking very clearly through who they are and what their pain is, how they make decisions. And then ultimately, we want to kind of think about where do they actually find information and where could we get in front of them a little bit more often so that maybe we can either get more leads through marketing or really understand how we could become more influential in their day-to-day decision making. So I think once we've got these personas developed, we're going to obviously collect all this information and we're going to try to assemble it in a way where it becomes a training tool. Ultimately, the reason that we want these buyer personas to be so clear is so that we can train our staff on how to pinpoint the right customer before even reaching out. But then when they do reach out, have better conversations, and of course, make sure that they can sell value very quickly. And so I think summarizing that in an example, in a document somewhere for each of your key personas is really the foundation. Once you've got those key personas and you've got a summary, you've got something that you can really work on training your staff with. So, this example here is a Class A office property manager. And what we're saying is, hey, if we're going to go sell property managers landscape maintenance, we want to understand what they're responsible for, what their pain points are, generally what their behavior is going to look like in most cases when we're talking to these people, and then of course where we find them or where they get information. So once I've assembled all of this, it becomes easy to train staff. But the most important thing is it gets us the foundation needed to go and do better marketing, more effective marketing, and really identify who we're going to speak to within the ideal customer profiles that we've created. So if we decide we're going to go service Class A offices, who specifically are we going to be selling to and dealing with, and how are we going to approach them best? That's ultimately what we're trying to do with this document. So another example here is institutional snow and ice. So here you can see this is Class A office property manager, a little bit different set of issues than maybe an institutional snow and ice manager. So this could be a facilities manager or a director of facilities at a hospital, for example. Now, if we're going to go and try to get 15 or 20 hospitals to do snow management for, or this could be year-round landscape maintenance, we want to really understand what the typical titles are going to be like, so we reach out to the right people. Then when we get talking to them, we want to make sure that we can ask questions that allow them to see that we understand them, we understand their pain, and we're going to kind of help them through the process of solving this problem that they've got, which is buying snow or buying snow management. Their problem is really the fact that they have to go and figure out who the right person is to solve the issue of hiring a snow contractor who's going to ultimately do the job the way they need it done. Now, sometimes I think our salespeople forget that we're dealing with other people, and we think about the company and we think about the company's needs, which are very important. The hospital needs to buy a snow management contract so that they prevent liability, so that ambulances come and go on time, so that people have safe places to park, guests who are coming and going aren't slipping and falling, the employees at the hospital are safe. They've got a long list of reasons why they need a snow contract. But in this case, Fran, the director of facilities, her main issue is her boss has said, hey, you need to go hire a snow contractor. So her immediate personal problem is not the fact that the ambulance needs to come and go on time. Her issue is, I need to find the right contractor who's going to do this. And so I think when we really approach these buyer personas on a more personal level, we can kind of first speak to their needs as an individual, kind of make sure that they understand that we are the trusted advisor, that we have solved this problem for dozens and dozens of other people who have the exact problem as Fran. And of course, we're going to speak to all of the needs of the hospital because ultimately that's who she's acting for. But we want to make sure that Fran feels as though when we're having a conversation with her, this is a normal conversation for us. We help people like Fran find the solution to this problem every day of the week. And that has to be done with a lot of care and I think some forethought. Because if our salespeople reach out to Fran and they start asking questions too quickly that maybe relate to something that isn't her primary focus, they're kind of draining the tank. And I think if you have salespeople who ask 3 or 4 of the wrong questions and maybe drop 3 or 4 of the wrong nuggets or power statements as they open up with somebody like Fran, they quickly move on. They're not interested in really going the distance on that consultation. And so I think we have to be really, really strong in the way that we reach out to these buyer personas. And that's why we want to take the time to develop them. So ultimately, we're going to take these buyer personas and use them to create a sales strategy that's very, very specific to that specific buyer. Here, what we're trying to do is make sure that this person understands why they should choose us and why we're the best company to solve all of the problems that their company is trying to fix. So obviously we're going to get better at marketing. We can get much, much better at customer engagement. But ultimately what I want to do with this is really fine tune the questions that we're going to ask these buyers when we finally do get them on the phone. Now, opening questions are super important. We have to be able to build a little rapport before we move into some of the deeper questions. But ultimately, I think most salespeople just aren't armed with really strong questions based on the people that they're actually trying to sell to. And so I think on an ongoing basis, whether you've done this before or not, I think it's something you should update and you should kind of consider evolving and improving on an ongoing basis just based on your actual results. So I wanted to kind of touch on the questions. Next week, we're going to go a little bit deeper into developing these questions and things to think of when you're creating the questions, and then ultimately how to use compelling questions as a tool when selling, but then how to actually train your staff on building the questions, practicing using role play training within your sales team. But we'll go a lot deeper next week into this. But for this week, what I wanted to do was just really talk through how to use them and why they're so important. You can imagine the companies that don't actually take the time to create these really good questions probably see some pretty unusual results. Probably have salespeople who go out and every time they sell somebody something, it seems to close. Then you could hire somebody new, or maybe you've even got some people that have been around for a while who just don't close the same. And you always kind of wonder why. Like, why is it so easy for the best salesperson to close business and so hard for everybody else to catch up? In my experience, most people who are not getting good results don't have good questions. And the more that you actually listen to people, asking the questions and kind of help coach them, the more, they'll learn. And ultimately, we can't always practice in front of the customer. We should be role playing back at the office. And so developing the questions for each persona and then practicing those using role play training is, I think, the magic weapon to getting really, really good at selling. And as you can imagine, these questions are going to be different for everybody. If we've got the buyer persona at the hospital, they're different questions than the buyer persona at a car parts manufacturing plant with just-in-time shipping needs for the automotive industry. And so we want to create questions that are very specific to our ideal customer profiles and the buyer personas so that they land well. We get more of a relationship a little faster. We position ourselves as the trusted advisor. And of course, we start to see much, much better conversion rates as we roll through the sales process. And ultimately, these questions are giving us everything we need in terms of understanding before we go build a proposal, which again is a place where I think many, many salespeople really lack skills. They build proposals the way that the company wants the proposal to look that they work for, instead of the way the customer wants the proposal to look. And I think we do need some level of flexibility in the way that we approach customers, particularly in the commercial landscape maintenance and snow business, because different businesses have different needs, and we have to be flexible in the way that we put the pricing and packaging in front of them. And I've found firsthand, we have a much, much higher close rate when we're flexible in the way that we present the pricing. And if we present the pricing in ways that, either our competitors weren't smart enough to consider, or, in some cases, in a way where even the prospect wasn't expecting to see the price that way. And so I think flexibility is a key tool that we all have to have in our sales playbook when we're selling these contracts. But we can't really decide how to use various ways of presenting pricing and packaging without really truly understanding what their pain points and their needs are specifically. And so these questions really get us what we need to put together a better or more compelling proposal. So it's not just about positioning ourselves as the expert, it's about then giving ourselves all of that information that's going to be needed downstream to put together this perfect proposal that is just too good to pass up. And so we want to be able to understand the pain points and all the needs and what their priorities are, and then craft the proposal around that. So it's kind of starting from the other end of the spectrum. All too often I see companies trying to do business one way. And I understand that way of thinking is, we want all of our customers to be on the same kind of package because it's easier for billing or it's easier for management. But the reality is the best customers are expecting a very, very customized approach to solving their needs. And so what I feel like happens to companies who are too rigid in the way that they do business, they don't ever really get the best contracts, and they really start to suffer when it comes to trying to grow and scale because their rigid process is kind of leaving them out in the cold, so to speak, when other competitors are coming forward with something that just resonates better with the customers. And so the more flexibility, the better, and the more that it's tied specifically back to these questions, the more success you'll have. So I just thought I'd run through a quick example for this week. Next week, we're going to go a lot deeper on these questions, how to use them, and why the questions are what they are. But for this week, I just thought maybe as a little bit of a warm up for next week, I'd just kind of share a few and just kind of explain how they help. So if I were out selling a commercial snow customer, and again, commercial snow I think is far too vague. And for this week, I'm just trying to explain how we'd use the questions. So these are a bit on the vague side. Commercial snow, I would always then break down, is it institutional, is it industrial, and then even from there, what type is it? Because institutional, I'd have different questions for a school than I would for a hospital or government buildings. Whereas with industrial, they'd be very different questions again. And so when I say commercial, I would identify further so that the questions are a little bit more compelling. So at a more generic level though, ultimately these questions, I want to accomplish a few things. Number one, I want to know what the current challenges are. And sometimes there aren't any, but in most cases, there's going to be a few. So here I'm just saying, what are the biggest challenges that you're facing right now with your existing plowing contractor? Was there anything that you didn't like? And sometimes it's even good to ask if there was something that they really like. Is there anything that's going really well or kind of not going very well right now? We can be a little flexible, obviously, in the way we ask these questions, but ultimately, all I'm trying to do here is understand what they didn't like. And that gives me everything when it comes to coming back with a power statement. So if they tell me, yeah, you know what? Generally, they were here and did the job, but it's my job to approve the billing every month. And I go to approve the billing and it just says like 22 plows and 8 salt applications with no dates, times. I don't know if it's right. I'm supposed to approve this and send it on to accounting, but there's not enough detail on the bill, and I know accounting's going to send it back. So this has been an ongoing problem that I've been dealing with this contractor, and they can't seem to fix it. And so when they tell me that one pain point, it gives me an opportunity to build a little credibility by coming back with a power statement before moving on to the next question that allows me to speak to how we do that better. And what I'm trying to do here is just build a little momentum in the conversation so that I can really understand their needs, but also create this position of authority or this trusted advisor position in the conversation. So first off, I need to know current challenges. Next up, I'm always going to try to figure out what is the actual impact on this business if they decide to go ahead with me to maintain their landscaping or plow their snow or whatever it happens to be. Now, I want to understand what happens to this business if we fail or if our competitor fails. So I want to ask a question along these lines, like, hey, how do snow and ice affect your daily business operations and your overall customer accessibility? And again, if it's a hospital or a school, that's a different problem than if it's a parts manufacturing plant. And I want them to answer this because I want to build upon that with my following questions, and again, with my power statement to kind of answer to it a little bit. And what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to find out what's important to them, trying to build the rapport, make sure they see me as the expert, and I'm trying to build momentum. And so as we get through these questions, I'm trying to speed up the momentum a little bit. So here what I'm saying is I want to understand exactly what the risk is for you so that I can solve it ultimately. As I move forward in my next question, I can kind of ask, hey, how important is it for you to have a really proactive plan in place that really makes sure that we're even, pre-treating and that we've got this property in a position where it's safe all the time? Does that sound important to you? And if it's not that important to them, maybe they're just not the ideal customer profile. And this is important too. Sometimes salespeople just want to sell everybody they meet with, but the reality is not everybody is going to be a perfect customer. And so if our business is really focused around bare pavement on snowplowing properties, and we don't want properties that aren't going to take pre-treatment and ongoing de-icing, then this question actually helps me filter them as well. So I'm still actually qualifying them while I'm asking these questions. So if they tell me, well, actually, that's not important to us. We don't even bother de-icing. We don't want to spend that much money. I've saved myself some effort here. I've found out what I need to know. This is just not really an ideal customer, and I can accept that. So some of these questions are also still qualifiers, and I think that's important to keep in mind. Another question, I want to really evaluate what they really need. And now, as I'm getting a little further into these questions, I'm trying to figure out how to put a proposal together. That's a really important component of these questions, is I want to know how to do business with this company. And so what I'm saying is, hey, what are your potential costs to your business if we don't manage this effectively? Now, if I've got a car parts person sitting in front of me, and they've got just-in-time trucks coming in one end of their plant with raw materials, and then going out the other end off to a car parts or to a car manufacturing plant so that their line doesn't stop, I know right away, well, this person is going to be super worried about the trucking docks, the loading docks at the back of the property. That's probably going to be the number one priority, because they're a just-in-time manufacturer in an industry where there's likely to be some pretty high fines if they don't deliver. In other words, if they can't get parts to the General Motors plant or the Ford plant and that line stops, there's a big problem. So we have to be able to maintain access at all times. And one thing for me when I'm trying to sell is I always try to find prospects who have an expensive problem if we can't service them, because that kind of makes us more of an emergency service. And in any business, emergency services command a better price. And so ultimately, if they don't have a major problem, if we don't show up and plow snow, then they're not going to pay a lot of money for snow. It's that simple. So as I'm out targeting the ideal customers, I'm finding customers who are likely to have a really big financial loss if their snow isn't plowed. That sets the value of my service. And so I have to choose people who are likely to value what I'm selling to begin with. And now what I'm doing here with this question is just making sure that they think in the moment, well, yeah, there is actually a pretty big problem. There's a lot of liability or a big financial issue if the snow's not plowed. And so this also gives me an opportunity to drop a power statement and explain to them that we service other companies that look just like this. So in the case of the parts manufacturer, I might say, yeah, we actually service 3 other automotive part manufacturers who are on just-in-time delivery as well. And we put dedicated equipment on their properties, and we've got a customer portal so that they can see exactly what time we arrived, what we've done, whether or not we're still there, and all of these other things, so that we can really make sure that they understand what we have to offer. And then that kind of rolls me into my next question, right? Is, in the past, maybe, have you had issues with timing? Have you had any problems with snow contractors, not showing up? I can throw a couple of little jabs in there just in conversation, but ultimately these big themes need to be really clear as I enter, so that when I leave the meeting, I've got everything I need to put the right proposal together. So the last big question that I'd drop would be on the service expectations. And so this is me saying, okay, I understand your needs, but I just want to kind of be clear, when you're deciding on who to hire, I want to understand, is it most important to focus on response times, reliability, or is it more price? Because when I build this quote, I want to make sure that I meet your needs, but I also want to be successful in getting the job. So I don't want to overdo it either. And so I can ask them honest questions, I think, here around, hey, would you like to see dedicated equipment on the job site? Now, I think we could probably manage the property with one loader, but that might take us 7 or 8 hours. In your experience, would you think that it's going to be advantageous for us to put more equipment here and get you plowed within 4 hours? And so this is them now telling me, oh no, we can't wait 8 hours to plow snow. We need the snow plowed in 4, or maybe it's 2, or maybe they need the whole place plowed every hour. And in any case, once I understand what that expectation is, then I can build a proposal for that. And a few things happen. Even if my price is more money, they understand that first off, I had asked better questions, but that I built a quote that serves their needs exactly the way they explained it to me. And so these service expectations really become, I think, one of the most important things when we're selling landscape maintenance or snow management. I think all too often we're afraid to ask these questions because we sell the way that we buy. We're afraid to ask the right questions because it might indicate that we have to charge more. And I think we have to train salespeople who are out selling landscape to have more confidence to focus on the need and not the price. We'll get to the price later, but let's figure out what the need is first. And the right customers, type of customers that you actually want to be servicing, have higher needs. And so the more that we ask these questions, the better. I'm going to be excited if this prospect tells me, well, no, actually, we've typically had 2 loaders dedicated to our property and they still don't plow this place fast enough. I don't know why they don't have 3. And if they tell me that, then I can go ahead and put a proposal together and indicate what it would cost for 2 loaders to be dedicated to the site for the year and give them an option, being flexible here. If you want faster service, if you want more dedicated equipment, we can give you a 3rd loader and here's the price for that as well. Now, what I've done is I've actually given them pricing for their needs, not mine. And I think a lot of salespeople focus too much on their own needs, which is I need to keep the price down so I can sell this contract. The best customers don't buy from salespeople like that. They buy from salespeople who uncover the need and then actually provide a proposal that solves that problem exactly the way that it was described. And these compelling questions allow your salespeople to do that. I think all too often salespeople are out selling based on price instead of based on need. And so I think it really impedes great businesses from scaling. Operationally, you're probably capable of doing more, but you're not selling more. And I think you're not selling more in many cases because of these questions. So next week, we'll really go a lot deeper into the questions to make sure that we really figure out how to create the ideal solution before we move on to creating proposals. So again, next week, we're going to get really in depth on uncovering the pain points using these power questions, how to develop the questions for each persona type that we covered here this week, and ultimately how to kind of use the questions to develop, I think, better proposals and more compelling pricing. I'll take a few questions now, and if there isn't any, we'll call it a day. I don't see any popping up here in the chat. Is there any questions before we sign off? Questions are open. All right. Well, if you have anything, you can always ask me. Oh, there's one right there. Do you get into budget? Yes, I absolutely like to talk about budget in most conversations. And typically what I try to do is uncover all of the needs like this first. And then, just as I'm starting to say in my closing kind of questions or comments, I'm going to put a proposal together. Before I do that, is there any specific way that you'd like to see the pricing? Is there a way that you've done business in the past that you'd really like us to kind of compare to? Maybe it's for apples to apples reasons. Now, I might show you a few different ways of doing business if that's okay, but I'd love to know what you've done in the past. And if there is a budget that you're trying to work within, I'd love to know what that is as well. So I'll drop it and ask it, but the reality is with commercial maintenance and commercial snow, I find budget discussion is a hard one to really uncover. Oftentimes they don't want to say, well, the other guy is 100,000 or 200,000. So oftentimes they kind of talk past that. Whereas in residential, I find it a little bit easier for people to just say, well, hey, I've got 50,000 at the very most to spend on the backyard. Show me what you can do. I think because this is more of a commodity with commercial landscape maintenance and snow, they don't like to talk budget. So again, that's why it's so important to have these persona-based approaches, because if it's a homeowner, I'm going to double down on budget. But in this scenario, I'll probably drop it, but it's not going to be a big area of focus. Hopefully that helps with that one. Good to see you here, Mark, by the way. Hope the year's going well. Feel free, I think that's it for questions. Go ahead and hit me up on LinkedIn or Instagram anytime. I try to post there daily and answer all the questions and DMs as often as possible. So please hit me up there if you have anything in between. Really appreciate you joining, and we'll build on this next week. So thanks again. Appreciate everybody joining.